Question. What kind of Bible is best?
It's a ridiculous question.
False. Black Bible.
There are basically two schools of thought.
Fact. Bibles eat beets. Bibles. Beets. Battlestar Galactica.
Bears do not... What is going on? What are you doing?
If you hang around Christianity, you'll hear a lot of opinions about which Bible is best. But I'm not sure that's really the right question. That's like asking which tool is best. And if we just rifle through what I've got right here. Here, it's a butter knife. It's great for spreading butter and cutting things that are dull and don't need precision. This is an X-Acto knife. It's terrible for spreading butter. It's great for cutting things tightly. I got a hockey stick back there. It also has a flat edge, but it's not good for either of these purposes. It's good for hitting a hockey puck. I've got this tape measure. You can't cut anything with this. So which one is best? A butter knife, a hockey stick, an X-Acto knife, this tape measure? Yeah, it's the wrong question. They can all be very useful agents that accomplish things that are true and good if employed in the right circumstances and if you know how to use them. Well, likewise, you got all these different versions of the Bible floating around, and people get really loyal to the one that they like. And unfortunately, Christians are humans, and we can have the tendency to get on a very high horse about versions of Christianity and expressions of Christianity that we like, and get very grumpy about versions and expressions that we don't like. So where there needn't be a controversy, there often is. In this video, I don't want to try to answer the question, which Bible is best. I want to more break it down like we're looking through a tool chest and figuring out what tool might be most effective for what job, what limitations each of those tools might have, and what specific applications they might have that could correspond with what you need them to do. So what I'm going to do is go through 6 versions of the Bible that are pretty popular, that are floating around right now, and talk about those things, and then you can figure out what makes sense for you. In this video, I'm going to go through the translations in order from most literal word-for-word translation approach to most thought-for-thought translation approach. And as we go along, you'll see that each successive version sounds a little bit more like the modern English you're used to. Well, on the far end of the literal scale is the New American Standard Bible, which I totally meant to bring with me from home, but it's still sitting there. If you'd like to picture it in your brain, it looks a lot like these Bibles, except it says New American Standard on the spine. What's different about it, though, is when you actually crack the thing open, the language is familiar to an English speaker, but the rhythm of it feels a little bit off. You'll notice the divisions and paragraph and shape of it is a little different than what you might see in another version. And the reason for that is that we're going with a very literal, the Greek word is this, therefore the English word that corresponds to that is this. And if a little bit of the meaning is hard to get into because of that, we're going for the most accurate translation possible. In fact, the NASB people boast that it is the most accurate English translation, which is true, depending on how you define accurate. If what you want is for meaning to perhaps suffer a little bit, or to make it more work for people to get into the meaning, but to be very accurate with what the Greek word means in terms of the corresponding English word, can't argue. NASB, pick it up, use it to study. But if what you mean is the concepts, ideas and principles in the original text coming through in a way you would understand in modern English, it could be argued that there are better versions, and we'll get into some of those in a minute. The super sexy rock star of Bibles right now is the English Standard Version. You're going to see people carrying this around all over the place. Christians are talking about it a lot, and I think the reason it's so popular right now is that it skews far to the word-for-word or formal equivalence end of the spectrum. So people who read it feel like they're getting a pretty literal read of what the source material is saying. But the ESV is more thoughtful about incorporating the stylistic prose of the original authors, and even draws some style from the King James Version to make it flow and read a little bit. So instead of just being a cold academic study of words in a word order that might be super accurate but just doesn't read well, like the NASB, here you get a little bit of flourish, you get a little bit of poetry, And as a result, when I read this as opposed to the NASB, I feel like it gets through the armor a little more often and actually connects with me at the soul and emotional level a bit more than the NASB. Is one of those better than the other? I don't know. Like I said before, it depends on what tool you need at a given time. One other note about the ESV is that unlike a lot of other modern translations, this one draws on a little smaller collection of manuscripts and will only get into the deep water of manuscript analysis when it gets into a really challenging or complex passage to translate. So it's a little bit more from the family of the King James Version, which we're going to talk about next. And depending on your opinion of manuscript evidence and what manuscript evidence is best, that could be a plus or a minus for the ESV. The most famous version of the Bible is this beast right there. It's the Family Bible. It's the King James Version. This thing was put together in 1611 and has only been updated twice since then. This particular family version, I don't know what they were doing with the printing here. They just made it too big, so now it's bent. But you see the King James a lot presented like this. Super fancy, the gold edges and the big script. Part of the appeal of the King James is the tradition of the thing. This is the first widely read English version of the Bible. This was the version of the Bible that, from cradle to grave, walked people through their Christian faith through most of the modern age. And the prose of this is the prose in which a lot of Christians are conditioned to think about church and Bible. Even if you're not a King James Bible reader, that 17th century style is something that you probably know a verse or two, or at least a phrase from the Bible in. Like, think about how you recite the Lord's Prayer. There's a decent chance it's from this. Think about John 3:16. There's a decent chance that even if you read one of these in your brain, you recite it from this. Well, what comes with that is that some people look at modern translations and they get really angry about them because this feels like the real deal. There's a whole text debate. People who like the King James love the fact that it's drawn from a much later, very narrow manuscript family, that the manuscript backing behind the 1611 version was very small numerically, but many people who specifically love the King James or would say this is the only version of the Bible anybody should read would say that God miraculously preserved those manuscripts, but that all the other manuscripts were somehow corrupted or perverted. I find this to be such a disappointing take. I hear it all the time. The logic is deeply convoluted. That doesn't mean that the people who love the King James and think all other versions of the Bible are wrong, are bad people, or not Christians. I just think they're picking a fight over something they don't need to pick a fight over. Theologically, there is unity amongst all of these versions. The NIV is not teaching a different Christianity than the King James. It's just a different translation philosophy from a different moment in the history of the world and the history of the English language. So where does the King James Version fit now in your toolbox? Well, in my opinion, it's an even more robust, prose-oriented translation than the ESV. Writing is art. If you believe, as Christians do, that God inspired the authors of the Bible, that means that God was inspiring the artistry and the turns of phrases behind that as well. There's poetry in the Bible. Even the telling of history and the writing of letters, there's an artfulness to it in the same way you put serious thought into crafting a very intentionally written letter. So did they. And the King James Version makes an enormous effort to communicate that artistry and to do so in a language or a version of our language that has some romantic connotations, a connection to our past. Like, for many, Christianity just sounds better and maybe even a little more official in that older tone. I'm not crazy about the manuscript evidence behind the King James Version, but rather than bashing the King James, I'm more in awe of it. That with the limited scope of manuscript evidence that these scholars had to work with in the first place, they still produced a version of the Bible that communicates the exact same theology and is in 99.9 whatever percent agreement with even modern translations that are dealing with, at times, 20,000 plus manuscripts for their work. So where does it fit? I think it's something that you would enjoy reading. I think it's a good complement to other stuff. It is a bit more literal than the translations we're going to look at in a minute. And buyer beware. If you start talking about the King James with people, there's a chance you're going to get into a weird religious argument. Be gracious, try to sidestep it. Okay, next one. This fourth translation that I want to talk about demonstrates a shift away from the formal equivalent word-for-word philosophy and toward the dynamic equivalent thought-for-thought philosophy. It's not all the way down the spectrum, but it's getting there. And that's the New International Version. This is the version that I have on my desk. Well, this is the 1984 edition. This is the brand new edition, which I just bought, so I would have one of these. And I keep it in this box, so it'll keep smelling like a baseball glove, which somehow makes the Bible better for me. The thing about the NIV is that it's very interested in communicating the concepts of each, say, Greek original word or each Greek turn of a phrase in very up-to-date modern English. It's written at a 7th grade reading level, so it's supposed to be something that almost everybody can get and track with. And the NIV draws from a very robust set of manuscript evidence, whereas ESV intentionally narrowed its scope, whereas King James intentionally even more narrows its scope of manuscript evidence. The New International Version is saying, let's bring it all in. Let's do the eclectic manuscript approach. Let's look at it all. Let's wrestle with all of it. Let's add it all up in different ways and try to come up with what we think is absolutely the most credible read on the original language. Now, the downside of that is that some people would say, well, that means this Bible is going to constantly change every time English evolves a little bit or every time we find a dozen new manuscripts. But the upside of that is, well, it's dynamic and it keeps working and it keeps making sense for each successive generation or half generation. Again, the critic might come back and say, yeah, but then you memorize a bunch of stuff and then the Bible changes a few years later. What the heck? Well, again, on the positive side, someone might come back and say, right, but theologically, it's absolutely in keeping with all of the other expressions of the Bible, and why don't we strive for maximum accuracy in terms of concepts? Ultimately, I find the NIV to be a great balance between thought for thought and word for word. I trust the scholarship behind it. I just had Karen Jobes, she's an NIV Bible translator, on the program just a couple videos back. So if you want to know more about how this works and why I respect it as a translation, you can go and check that out. But basically, the NIV is going to be your center cut, very commonly used, most circulated modern translation. Thought I had a copy of the fifth Bible that I was going to talk about here, but I am not seeing it. It's my daughter's Bible. It has a butterfly on it, and it is the New Living Translation. The New Living Translation is a very recent translation. It uses the same text evidence as the NIV, but it goes even further in the direction of thought-for-thought translation. I mean, it is wildly readable in modern English, and even a little bit lower reading level, I think, than the NIV. But because it is so dependent on contemporary English, they're going to have to update it a lot. So I think the first version came out mid-90s, and they had to update it within maybe 10 years, 9 years. It was quick, whatever the case. And I'm theologically respectful of the people who are behind this project, because a whole bunch of them are people I know who were professors at the seminary where I went. So you need to take my bias into account in saying I like the scholarship behind it, but at the same time you'll notice I don't have one sitting here and can't find the one that I got for my kids. Why is that? Because frankly, it provides very little value for me in my study habits. And so it's not something I consult at all. It is fun to go and look at how they turn the phrase and to think about how nicely that really does read as they go concept for concept. But it's the kind of thing that if you are looking for a very smooth read, a version of the Bible that's theologically accurate, has great research behind it, but also goes down easy, go New Living. If you're looking for a study Bible, maybe it's your first choice, but it wouldn't be mine. Despite all of the time and all of the different choice of what manuscript to work with and what philosophy to work with, you still see unanimity in theological ideas in each and every one of these translations. What that says to me is that Christianity and the Bible are wildly translatable, but the truth of the thing, again, whether you embrace it or reject it, is front and center and has been very consistent throughout. I think that's plenty to think about. Thanks for slogging through a whole bunch of different Bible versions with me. I hope it was helpful in you thinking through what tools make sense for whatever projects you're working on. We'll get into more of this stuff with more nuts and bolts of the Bible coming up soon. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. Catch you in a bit.
Question. What kind of Bible is best?
It's a ridiculous question.
False. Black Bible.
Well, that's debatable. There are basically two schools of thought.
Fact.
Bears
Bibles
eat beets.
beets.
Bears. Beets. Battlestar Galactica.
Bears do not... What is going on? What are you doing?